version, if you like to turn there with me. I'll give us a moment so we can all see that text together. In Matthew chapter 13, we'll start off right there in verse 1. It's called the parable of the sower. You're going to hear seeds sown in 4 different places. The person who is doing the sowing, the farmer, is God, and the seed is God's message. And it's being sown in 4 different places, 4 different soil types, which are about the human heart. And so chances are, with any number of people, there's probably at least 2 or 3 soil types, or because it's such a large group, there's probably all 4 represented here today. Let's go ahead. This is page 18 in the New Testament. Page 18 in that Pew Bible. That same day, Jesus left the house. Oh, before I even start, you might be thinking, Nick, didn't you just have vacation this last week? How did you even have time to prepare a sermon? You're probably thinking, since he had vacation, he didn't have time to prepare a message. And in fact, you're thinking because it's hot anyways, you might be thinking he didn't have time to prepare, maybe 5, 7, 10 minutes max. Becky shaking your head, no, she knows better. She knows better. Wishful thinking if you thought you were going to get out of here quick. Wishful thinking. Plenty of time for me to think on vacation because I think of you guys. Verse 1, Matthew 13. The same day, Jesus left the house and went to the lakeside where he sat down to teach. The crowd gathered around him. That crowd was so large, he got into a boat and sat in it while the crowd stood on the shore. Verse 3, he used parables to tell them many things. So customary thing for Jesus to do in a large crowd is to tell these parables. What do we have here, Jesus? Once there was a man who went out to sow grain, Jesus says. Now into verse 4. As he scattered the seed in the field, some of it fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some of it fell on rocky ground where there was little soil. The seed soon sprouted because the soil wasn't deep. But when the sun came up, it burned the young plants, and because the roots had not grown deep enough, the plants soon dried up. Some of the seed fell among the thorn bushes, which grew up and choked the plants. But some seed fell in good soil, and the plants bore grain. Some had 100 grains, others 60, and others 30. And Jesus concluded, listen then, if you have ears. As one student said after I said verse 9, listen then, if you have ears. They're like, oh, that's pretty punny, ears of corn, harvesting. You have ears. I said, I don't think it was trying to be a pun, but I guess it meant the student was paying attention, so that's a good thing. So 4 different places. One along the path, the birds snatch right away. Other seed into shallow soil. Takes those shallow roots, grows quick, roots not deep, sun scorches, plant's dead. All right. So 1, the birds get it on the path. 2, springs up quick, sun scorch, plant's dead. 3, plant takes roots, but along with that plant, there's all these other things coming and choking out the life. So it can't produce fruit either. I have a garden, you have to go out and you got to weed the garden, right? Barb, do we have a picture of the garden? Oh, do you have the first slide? Oh, you're good. So the first slide, I have boards. Go ahead to the second slide. Barb, you can see it. So Tony's not here today, but Tony says, Nick, to keep the weeds down, right? So this third soil type, put the boards in between your rows. Brilliant idea. I wouldn't have done it, right? Keeps the weeds down. And then the fourth, you don't have everything growing up to choke out the life. Rather, you get the crop, you get the harvest. Okay. Jesus actually explains this parable. In verse 18, he explains it. He says, "Listen then and learn what the parable of the sower means. Those who hear the message about the kingdom," so that's the seed, the message about the kingdom, "but do not understand it, are like the seeds that fell along the path. The evil one, not birds, is the evil one who's coming to snatch away that seed, to snatch away the message of the kingdom." Okay. Then number 2, the seeds that fell along the rocky ground or the shallow soil, they receive the message gladly. All right. So they spring up. So there is plant. It springs up quickly. They receive it gladly as soon as they hear it, but it does not sink deep. There's not the deep roots. And so they don't last long. That's the one where the sun scorches. So when trouble or persecution comes because of the message, they give up at once. The seeds that fell along the thorn bushes, this is the third example now. They stand for those who hear the message, but the worries about life and the love for riches choke out the message, and they don't bear fruit. Now on to the fourth. And the seeds sown in the good soil stand for those who hear the message and understand it. They bear fruit, some as much as 100, others 60s, and others 30. Right. You can go to the next PowerPoint slide if you can, Barb. So I got a zucchini from the garden here. That's all right. Not that I really have a green thumb, but I freshly picked weeds from this morning. All right. So they're authentic. Check them out. They're authentic. Yeah. Uh-huh. And what we have here, like, Nick, why are you putting up a picture of tomato that you already took a bite out of? Well, I didn't take a bite out of it. One of these little critters, I don't know what's going on. I come back from Tennessee, and I'm like, Jessica, how many tomatoes did you get? She's like, well, basically everything. Someone's eaten the bottom of my tomatoes. And that's one of them that I could actually pick that was still firm enough. Everything else, it just fell apart. So, and just so you know, I didn't take a picture of a tomato off of Google Images. This is the tomato, right? So it's the real thing. It's the real thing, right? And the other one, the smaller one, I don't know, some little worms or something are getting into it. Of course, Jessica won't touch that then, right? She won't touch that. And so the question for us, Jesus is given this story that the large crowd could relate to. The question for us, I think, is simply this. It's a question of that has 3 words. Question with 3 words. Which are you? Which are you? The message of the kingdom comes? Is the evil one to snatch it up before the seed can even take root? Maybe it takes root, but it's rocky ground or shallow soil, and it springs up quick, and when the cares of this world come in, or a persecution or trouble comes in, it's done. It's over, right? Or are you like my garden? Number 3, right? It was coming, but these little critters get in. The cares of this world, or the worries of this world. And it says, the love of riches in the translation I read, the NIV actually says, the deceitfulness of wealth comes in and chokes it out. So I'm thinking that my tomatoes are going to be good this year, but we'll see. We'll see. And then the 4th. Doesn't matter. Trouble, persecution, your worries, you take them to God. you're not in love with materialism, consumerism. You don't hoard your riches. You're not just in love with seeing the number in your bank account go up and up and up and up and up, right? Pray that prayer of, Lord, make me generous, sacrificial, and a joyful giver. Because you don't want these other things, the love of riches, to choke off the life. You want to be the fourth. You probably have some of those here. So again, that question is which are you? People come to me and they say weird things like they want me to be a magic genie or to have some knowledge that I don't have, and am I a Christian? I have adults that come to me and want to know, am I a Christian, sort of a thing, and or students. That's more common. Students come to me, am I a Christian? And I give them this parable, and I say, go and have a conversation with God about this parable. And this parable is about it takes time. I don't know. So when that 14-year-old comes to me, when that 16-year-old comes to me, when that 22-year-old comes to me, I don't know. Come back in a decade. Come back in 2 decades. Come back at the end of life, and let's see what happened. Right? What won out in your soil of your heart? Without the passage of time, you don't know. Right? You have that seed that goes out. How would you know? It takes time. Christianity has this idea that it requires perseverance to the end. Perseverance to death. If you don't persevere in the faith until death, I'm certainly not going to be the one that says, oh yeah, but they made the commitment 4 decades ago, despite them really not following Christ or bearing fruit for the last whatever, That's not me. That's not Jesus in Matthew 13. It's perseverance until the end. My prayer is that this church would produce fruit or vegetables or zucchinis, not where rodents eat out the bottom of it or worms get in or the weeds choke it off. But the fruit that we produce at this church is the fruit of us growing in our affection for Christ. It's our mission statement. We are disciples who treasure Christ, growing in our affections for Christ. We see that, others see that, we're treasuring God. That's great fruit. Others want to get in on that. Others see that God is actually valuable, that he's actually precious, that he's actually a treasure. We're producing that fruit for others to see. They want that. We do treasure Christ, and therefore we make disciples for Christ. My tomato cage. All right? The question is, I don't put the tomato cage around my weeds to protect my weeds, right? But God has convicted me in my life from time to time that, Nick, you're putting the tomato cage around your weeds. You're supposed to put the tomato cage around the tomatoes. We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be honest with ourselves. We can't be prideful. We can't be arrogant. We can't ignore the weeds. Those weeds will just take over the garden, take over our hearts. can't put the tomato cage around the weeds. What are you trying to grow? What are you trying to produce? More and more weeds? A church that loses its mission, a church that loses its focus, just puts tomato cages around everything. Every ministry gets the tomato cage. Every weed gets a tomato cage. Everything in the garden gets to grow. It just gets overrun, overgrown. At Whiting, we say, no, we put the tomato cage around our mission. Growing in our affection for Christ, Christ as our treasure, so that others might see that, be compelled by that, know that they're wired for joy, and coming to Christians to hear about God, to be part of that joy. Treasuring Christ, making disciples for Christ. If that's not your end game, if that's not your goal, if that's not the 100, the 60, and the 30-fold crop, and you still come here, I'm not very smart to begin with. That just stumps me. That puzzles me. I'm hot. You're hot. There's better things for you to do on a Sunday morning. And so to protect that mission, to protect the tomato cage around our mission is to say, if you're not on board with our mission, it actually would be best for you not to be part of Whiting Community Baptist Church. This is a statement I never would have said 10 years ago. This is a statement I never would have said 5 years ago or 3 years ago. But I realize when you allowed weeds to be part of the congregation, wrecks the whole garden. And so it would be better if we just keep the 1 or the 2 tomato plants in the garden than to allow all these other little things growing up and around. See, years ago I would have said, Nick, that is a terrible, terrible thing. You're allowing people to leave church. And I thought that was just the worst thing a pastor could ever say. But to protect the mission, the vision, the direction, the focus. There will be so much more that's produced with that 4th soil type than 20 times having numbers that are soil type 1, 2, and 3. What can this church do with soil type 1, 2, and 3? Where's the fruit? It's only the 4th type. There's this idea that churches first grow by subtraction. Might not be too good at math, right? It's counterintuitive, right? Churches first grow by subtraction. What does that mean? You get the people out, you get the weeds out, you get the soil type 1, 2, and 3 out, right? So that the core that's left is actually living on mission. You have the healthy garden. Have the healthy garden. You have the fruit. If Jesus was content, courageous, bold enough to let the masses leave, we have to be okay with that too at Whiting. We have to be okay with that. Me and my salary has to be okay with that. Christianity, the real message of Christianity, has tremendous joy for the Christian, and for the fence sitter, the message of Christianity is very dangerous because it's coming after your idols. The idols in the soil of 1, 2, and 3. And if you stay here, hopefully you'll know that Jesus is pursuing you. Jesus is pursuing you. He doesn't want you to be the one where the evil one snatches it. He doesn't want you to be the one where the sun scorches the message. He doesn't want you to be the one where the weeds choke out the message. He wants you to produce fruit. Join me in prayer. Father, you called us to live on mission. And Father, you two years ago, a group of people articulated the mission that we are disciples who treasure you, seeking to make disciples for you. And Father, truthfully, I don't know as the pastor how well we do that here. There is so much fear about going out and sharing faith. There's so much resistance and opposition. It doesn't come from outside the church walls. It comes from inside the church walls. People not willing to fulfill the second part of the mission, to make disciples for you. And Father, as I've so long thought, the reason why we can't get to the second part, making disciples, is because we're not yet fully convinced by the first part. We are disciples who treasure you, and so why we don't do the second part is we don't really see you as our joy and as our treasure, because if we did, evangelism and outreach would simply be the natural byproduct and overflow. The fruit would surely come if we saw you as our treasure. Father, I pray that you would make us bold like Christ as he taught a parable to the masses, but then only explained that same parable to a few. How troubling and how perplexing that would be in a world today that has the church doors wide open, but the church is an inch deep. And so, Father, help us to work wisely and discerningly for myself and the leadership team to know what it would be to teach your word, to give life to parables 20 or 2,000 years later. Lord, let us be a people that rejoice that Jesus has arms wide open on the cross, saying, come to me, it is finished, come to me. But knowing that as the arms are wide open on the cross, saying, come to me, that there are few who will come, but there are many who are the soil of 1, 2, and 3. So Lord, we pray that we would be that fourth soil type. Help us to deal with this message honestly before you in humility this week. In Jesus' name, amen.